Oh, my nerves are shot. Not really. Okay, so let's talk about the nervous system. So, um, so when we talk about the evolution of the brain, which is basically you have this mass of neurons, so all these neurons together, um, that leads to the control of this whole basic nervous system. So the brain is the control of the nervous system. It uses a nerve cord to control the body. Then we have uh, so when we look at the nerve net in what we call cnidarians, cnidarians have these stinging tentacles here, and so the they have a nerve net, so they don't have a brain. So you can see as we go along in the nervous system of the different animals, planarian, and then leeches, insects. So as we're getting more and more complex, um, we have this ganglia here and the ganglia here. So we're getting into more brain-like structures, not with the sea star, but getting into the planarian. And then the squid has a brain, and then of course the salamander. When we look at the whole overview of the nervous system, we have there's sensory input, and in sensory input, you have some sort of stimulus that is sent into the brain or the spinal cord. So there's some sort of stimulus, and then with the sensory reception, it receives the stimulus from the environment. So you're going to see something, touch something, smell something, and a stimulus is a form of energy, such as electromagnetic, so light, mechanical, such as pressure, sound waves. So there's some sort of stimulus, and then we move from the sensory input into integration. So now we're moving into the brain. This is the interpretation of whatever this energy that's coming in. Now there's some sort of interpretation from that energy in the central nervous system. So this is basically your thinking about whatever the stimulus is. And this interpretation of the stimulus leads to some sort of determination of an appropriate response. So stimulus is coming in, what is going on? So you're thinking about what's going on and then what has to happen. So, and you can see here the central nervous system is comprised of the brain and the spinal cord. So these two together make up the central nervous system. And then from there, you go into the peripheral nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system includes the sensory receptors and the motor neurons. So you're going to have this motor output. So some sort of energy is coming in. We're thinking about it, making a decision on what to do, and then physically there's going to be an effector. Something is going to happen as a result. And here's the difference between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Again, the central nervous system consists of the brain and then the spinal cord. And the peripheral nervous system are all the nerves that are radiating out. So here's all of your cranial nerves, all of the ganglia outside of the central nervous system. So they all radiate out from that central, and then your spinal nerves. And so, amazingly complex. The neuron, so the actual structure of a neuron, this is a nerve cell. So a neuron is a nerve cell, and you have this cell body, so this central cell body, and this, what it does is it takes the stimuli from different dendrites. So these dendrites are where the signal is being received, and the cell body then receives those that stimuli and then compiles the energy into one signal. So think of that cell body. This cell body here is like a funnel. So all these dendrites, the signal's coming in, and then it's received right here in the cell body. And the job of the dendrites, they collect and they carry the stimuli or the energy into the cell. So they cover a really large area. So again, think of surface area and the more area that they cover. So here's a great scanning electron microscope picture of the nerve. So here's that cell body, all these dendrites radiating out, and so sending the signals into the funnel, into the cell body. And then the axon here, the axon is one arm, and it carries this signal. So now all of it's been compiled, all of this signal's been compiled, and it carries that compiled signal away from the cell body toward the next neuron or the effector cell. So if there's a cell that says you're gonna do this, then it's gonna do that, or it's gonna go to the next neuron, either one. Then of course we have this myelin sheath, and this is a lipid layer. It's a layer of fat, and it's insulation around the axon, and it's created by what's called Schwann cells. And what it basically does is it prevents the electrical energy of the neuron from burning the underlying muscle tissue. So the tissue that's underneath, it stops that electrical impulse from burning that up. So you can think about it in terms of the rubber covering of an electrical wire. So if an electrical wire is not covered, that's where you end up getting shocked if you ever touch that, because that electricity is running through there where that rubber cover protects it, and that's what the myelin sheath does. And then you have this synapse that takes place. The synapse is the gap between the neurons, or between a neuron and an effector cell. So this synapse is that gap in between. All right, so the signal's moving this way. This is what the synapse actually looks like. You have your presynaptic cell, the synapse, and then the postsynaptic, cell. Now the neurotransmitters, this is the chemical that's produced by the neuron. And you hear that a lot in different commercials for medications, where it'll say it'll block the neurotransmitters, or so certain medications, that's exactly what they do, is they'll block this. So the neurotransmitters used to transmit the signal across that gap. The most common neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Now the reflex arc, so again, here's looking at, sorry, my dog's freaking out because there's a dog in the neighborhood. So here's that synapse, and you have this synaptic cleft, you have this opening up here. There's all kinds of stuff that happens in between the synapse and its final destination, depending on what it is. All right, so now the reflex arc, this is the simplest neural pathway. All right, and you have a stimulus energy is detected by a sensory neuron, and it's detected by some sort of sensory neuron, and that carries the energy signal up to the spinal cord. And so it detects it. It's going to, you can see this is like when you get your, they're checking your reflexes, so they hit your knee, it's detected the sensory neuron, and it sends it up to into the spinal cord. And then you have an interneuron, which is from the central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, remember. So the inner neuron is in the spinal cord, and it relays the energy back out to the motor nerve instead of to the brain. And so it's going to, inter means go between, and so it's between the senses and the motor neuron. So the energy is carried out of the central nervous system by this motor neuron. And it carries the energy to an effector cell, which is usually a muscle. And so you can trace this along, and you can see the sensory neuron, you can see these interneurons here, and then you could see the motor neuron. So it's receiving the signal, sends it to the inner neuron, out to the motor neuron to have a reaction. This is why we don't think about a reflex. That's why it's called a reflex. We don't think about it, it just happens. The stimulus never made it to the brain for integration. You don't have to think about it. Remember, the brain integration there is for thinking, and we don't have to. So there you have it. Nervous system, go for it.